It's a significant year in diplomacy for India as it gets set to host the big G20 summit in September. In a period of global flux, what does the G20 presidency mean for India? And is it a challenge as well? I have with me the G20 Chief Coordinator, Vardhan Shringla, with me today to answer some of those questions. Many thanks for speaking with NDTV. As I was saying, the first question, at a time when there's so much global friction because of the Ukraine war as well, what does the G20 presidency mean for India? Is it both a challenge as well as an opportunity?
Well, we live in an uncertain world today. We barely were recovering from the devastation of the COVID crisis when we had the Ukraine conflict. Now it is to some extent, a testimony to today's interconnected and interlinked global world, that global order, that you have countries that are not parties to the conflict, countries that are geographically far removed from the conflict, but are nonetheless feeling the consequences of that conflict as acutely as the countries that are actually in the vicinity. So it's a difficult situation as we take on our presidency on a global level. What's more is, I think, some of the problems that have arisen or some of the consequences impact far more, I would say, significantly on the developing world. Lowering GDP rates, higher inflation, indebtedness. Countries are feeling the pinch of lowering demand for goods and services. I would say even remittances that are, coming down in terms of the quantum that you normally receive. So developing countries are facing the brunt of this situation. So as we take on the presidency, obviously, you're right, there is a challenge and there is an opportunity also. And Prime Minister has correctly pointed out that every challenge can be transformed into an opportunity. And that's how we see our presidency. I think we see our presidency as very critical, coming in at a critical stage. I think there is an expectation from the global community that India, as a country that has made its mark in many senses, in many ways, on the global scenario, will be able to provide at least provide the elements of what could be solutions to global challenges of the day. And those solutions really have to do with bridging gaps, with decreasing polarizations wherever they exist, and then getting countries to focus on the serious issues of the day. What do you do? So our priorities really, when we talk about our own priorities, are determined largely by what the international community today is looking for.
All right.
What are the sort of challenges and what are the sort of solutions that could arise?
So, as far as the agenda is concerned for the final summit in September, there are so many issues, as you pointed out, the economic crisis, fuel, energy crisis, food crisis. How is the agenda decided between countries? Can you take us through what procedure is followed, if there is any?
So, one, I think, privilege that a president of the G20 enjoys is that it can set the agenda. So you propose the agenda, you initiate the agenda, and the G20 countries or invitee countries are part of that process, input into that agenda. In other words, India today has the opportunity to set its agenda or its narrative on the global agenda, and that's important for us, I think. And of course, in terms of how we see our broad priorities, and again, Prime Minister has elaborated on that, but clearly the issue of growth is very important. So we're looking at how we can sustain or provide momentum that can lead to accelerated, resilient, inclusive growth. We are also looking at how there can be a way to stimulate the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which we are in the middle of that process. That process is losing momentum because of the geopolitical and geoeconomic circumstances. How do we provide a stimulus to the SDGs? We are also looking at how we can take forward the agenda of climate financing, lifestyle for environment. I think that issue that it's, while we are committed to climate actions, but we need to do more than that. We need to also ensure that there is sustainable consumption, and that globally there is a certain, I would say, awareness that we as individuals, not just countries, but as those who inhabit planet Earth, need to, I think, exercise some level of, I would say, restraint when it comes to our own habits and consumption patterns. We are also looking at how we can contribute to more effective multilateral governance systems. I mean, for example, the multilateral financial institutions worked well for the first 50 years of their existence, but from the turn of the century, they haven't been able to rise up to the challenges of the 21st century. So if you have 70 developing countries today which are indebted or close to indebtedness, what can you do to enhance the mandate of these institutions that would make them more effective in today's context? So how can they garner more resources? Is there a scope for private public financing, blended financing, climate financing? These are issues that we'd work with our partners on. There's also women-led development, which is very important. And of course, one of the important areas we feel that we can also provide, I would say, options to a lot of countries is based on our own developmental experiences and achievements. Take the area of digital public goods. I mean, we have obviously, when it comes to financial inclusion, providing digital, through digital transformations have impacted in the lives of hundreds of millions of our citizens. How can we take that and, as Prime Minister says, to take it, make it simple, sustainable and scalable, our achievements in the digital transformation stage, and provide solutions that are based on these.
Okay.
So I think that is an important area of our focus, is that we are willing to offer our experiences in the area of digital transformations and how that has benefited our country to countries across the world through the G20 process.
So, at the end of the summit, there is a leaders' declaration in Bali. India played a significant role in being able to structure that declaration. What are we expecting this time? Is it always a challenge in a multilateral, format when it comes to a statement or a declaration?
Well, you saw that at the SCO summit, Prime Minister has said today is not an era of war. And that statement is reflected also in the outcome document in Bali at the G20 summit. Declarations and outcomes of the G20 are based on a consensus-driven process. In other words, all countries have to agree to any language that is included in a text of any declaration, any outcomes that come from the G20. So it's a collaborative process, it's a cooperative process, one in which you work with your other partners in finding not only solutions, but finding solutions that all G20 members and invitee countries and organizations can live with. So that's a very important part. That's the challenge in our presidency, is that how can we work with all of our partners in achieving outcomes that we desire, that the world wants, but one that all of us can agree to.
Now, if we look at two concrete, items which can be on the agenda, one is on the energy insecurity that we are seeing at the moment. Are we looking at any concrete solutions coming through? We just had an energy week in Bengaluru. What are the ideas coming through from leaders to be able to culminate into something concrete in September?
Well, I think from what I can see at the energy meeting in Bengaluru, all delegates were on the same page when it came to the need to find solutions to energy, the issue of energy security. How can we work together to address that issue? Obviously, when we talk about energy security, there are different pathways that lead to that. It depends on your energy base and your own circumstances. So there are different countries see it in different ways. But I think everybody, whether you're a producer or a consumer, is interested in ensuring that there's some stability in the energy, supply and demand scenario. At the same time, obviously, there are other aspects to it, and there is, the issue of energy efficiency, affordable energy. How do you find and how do you develop technologies that can lower costs of energy, but at the same time provide you with the same quality of energy that you desire. And a lot of research is going into those areas. You know, it's not just renewable energies that we are aware of, but there is a lot more work being done in that regard. And to make energy sustainable, we also have to keep in mind the issue of green and clean technologies. So how do you work in those areas? In our case, of course, we have worked a lot on areas like biofuels, ethanol, for example. The petrol-ethanol mix is one of the commitments that we had in terms of converting to green energy, and I think we have fulfilled that in many senses. But our innovations in that area, in other areas, for example, millets, it's our initiative that resulted in millets being declared, 2023 being declared as the International Year of the Millets. This is a climate resilient crop that requires less water. So in today's context, this is not only a nutritious crop, but it's something that is very much the sort of crop that you should be promoting. But in India, we've been consuming millets traditionally for centuries. So this is when you talk about a global superfood, millets is already there in our repertoire. So how do we take this forward? So there are many aspects of this, and I think the energy side is linked to climate. So these working groups go back to back, and there is a lot of I would say synergies that are established, and the outcomes would be one which is comprehensive.
Now, there are two other issues closely related as well in the current times, food and fertilizer crisis as well, largely impacting the developing world, which rarely finds a voice in these multilateral fora. India wants to be a voice for the global south. How do you see it channelizing the voices of the less developed countries on this platform?
Well, for us, articulating the hopes, aspirations and concerns of the developing world is very, very important. And that is why recently we took this initiative of organizing this Voice of Global South Summit, which was attended by 125 developing countries. And here what we wanted was to listen to what these countries had to say, and to try and understand what they want us to take up in fora like the G20. And we have certainly internalized what many of these countries have spoken about, whether it is in terms of sustainable consumption, whether it is in terms of how to address the issues of indebtedness. Obviously energy and food security are very high on that list. What are the ways that we can try and address those issues, I think will be brought out very, very clearly in during our presidency.
Now, coming to the organizing of such a summit itself, the logistics involved. It's a huge summit. We'll have 19 countries, the European Union, so many delegations. What is the experience like in trying to organize such a huge summit in a country like India?
So
and
you see,
in Delhi in September,
right.
Yes.
In the past, in 1983, we did the NAM Summit, we did Chogam. 2015, we did the India-Africa Forum Summit. But these were one-off affairs. The G20 is a much longer and a much, in terms of its spread, a much greater commitment. We are organizing, as I said, over 200 meetings across the country, which then culminates in ministerial meetings and then the summit. So in organizational terms, I think this is, larger and more challenging than any other event that we've organized in our history. And, the scale in which we are doing it, and of course the level at which we are trying to host many of these meetings is unprecedented. I mean, if you look at just the sheer number of venues, 56 cities across our country, every state and union territory will have a G20 meeting. Itself is, I think, unprecedented. I mean, the maximum any country has done is 25 in Indonesia. China did 14 cities in its own country. So we have achieved a spread which is remarkable. But in a certain sense, it is, I think, if you see the vision of the Prime Minister behind this decision, it is to involve not just every state and union territory, but every citizen of India in our G20 presidency. Every person in our country becomes a stakeholder in that presidency. So you have meetings that are close to you. It's not something remote just in Delhi. But at the same time, I think through a Jan Bhagidari mode, the message of our G20 presidency is being taken to the grassroots levels. Through festivals, through popular events, through universities, through schools. I think every citizen of our country to an extent is aware that we are president of the G20. What does it mean for India? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? I think this is a very important issue. And for the first time, foreign policy in terms of a very major event that we are doing is being taken to a level in which every citizen is integrally involved.
But there is stay, accommodation, transport. I mean, there are so many issues interconnected with hosting such a big event. Is there clarity on how all of those aspects will be tied together?
So the way the G20 works is that delegates pay for their own international and domestic airfares. They pay for their own accommodation, but the host country provides all the facilitation. I mean, you host them to meals, you take them and show them and showcase your tourism potential, your cultural heritage and diversity. So you do what it takes. So the idea of taking them to states, and as Prime Minister said, every state in our country has its own, I would say, uniqueness, has its own, I would say, identity, cultural identity, and that I think is what we need to showcase. So everywhere we take delegates, we arrange for them not only excursions to the most iconic places, but you also host events like the evenings cultural program in an iconic location. So if you go to Aurangabad, it will be outside the Ellora caves. In Kolkata, the state government organized it outside the Victoria Memorial with the sound and light show on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. So everywhere you go, and in Mumbai it was outside the Gateway of India, you expose delegates to not only iconic locations, but also there are initiatives like taking them on heritage walks. Early in the morning you take them for a heritage walk, or you can have a yoga session, or you can have a session on what millets represents in India. So there is a lot of, I would say, effort to try and introduce them to Indian culture, the tourism potential, and basically the people of India. It's a unique opportunity for us to present what India represents to the world. We expect 100,000 foreign delegates to come to India during this year. And I think it is for us a significant opportunity. And through Jan Bhagidari, we are involving our citizens, hundreds, tens of thousands of students, youth, people from all walks of life are being involved in G20 events directly or indirectly.
All the best for the organization of such a large event. Many thanks for speaking with NDTV.
Thank you, Maha.